This week number 7 is our first part on multimedia, in which we will be discussing content images and background images. Content images are part of our HTML, part of our content, and we create them by using the image element. Background images in comparison are part of CSS because we are doing them in the background of a certain element. Such as we give background colors to an element, we can also define an image in the background. And we are using the exact same property here, the background property. It just happens to be that the background color is the first value in that property, which is a shortcut. And because the background color is the first value, we can make use of this shortcut just to specify a color. But the second value actually in this shortcut is background image. And then these three properties here, they are also part of that shortcut, ultimately defining how that image in the background shall appear at, for example, at what location, and a couple of other settings here. Also, there are 4 other background properties that are not part of the shortcut background. However, they also ultimately determine some sort of settings in relation to the background image. So all these properties we are going over all has to do in this case with background image ultimately. And then we are going into content images. The images that we have gotten familiar a little bit already. The images, they can have a couple of other attributes that we will go discuss today. And also we can make use, for content images, we can make use of these 3 properties here that we take a look at. And then ultimately, towards the end of this week, we also take a look at colors. So far, all the colors that we have used so far are either red, light gray, so meaning always the English keywords. But there is not an English keyword for every color out there. There is only a limited amount of keywords. If we really want to have access to any color out there, then we must use a color code. And there are 2 different types of color codes out there that we also will investigate. And one of those color codes is directly related to opacity, and opacity and visibility are also directly related. So therefore we will also discuss those 2 properties towards the end of this week. We will, however, start with backgrounds, and before we do so, let me give a brief overview on a brief review of what we have done over the last couple of weeks in regards to what I have created here already. I have created 2 container boxes, and container boxes by default are display block elements, meaning they take up the entire line, and therefore the other element, this other box, therefore has to move down. So what I have done, of course, I have set them to display inline block, meaning they can now be in the same line whenever there is enough space. And immediately when we set something to inline block, we, as I recommended, to always immediately vertically align them. So using the vertical align property in CSS, which I have done to the top, because if we don't do that, then they will still be next to each other on the same line, but one may be further down than the other. This is depending on how much content there is in one box. If there is more content in one box than in the other one, then this ultimately happens. So therefore we can always remedy this by immediately setting vertical align to where we want things to be, such as, for example, in my case now, to the top. And vertical align is not an inherited property, so we do these settings on the box itself, where they shall be on the line, based on the elements itself. And what I've also done here, I have removed the white space in between those 2 elements, because whenever we have something in the same line, any element, then the browser treats those elements as if they were text, and therefore it makes a white space in between. So what I have done, I have removed that white space manually by bringing the code, the elements next to each other. And instead I have then given it a little bit of a margin, a gap outside the box. Also what I have done here, I have centered both of these boxes horizontally, so there is an equal gap on the right and on the left. And we have gotten familiar with 2 different ways of centering things. One way was setting margin right and margin left to the value auto, but this one only works for block level elements. For inline level elements, we are using these properties that can only be applied to inline level elements, and among there is the text align property. And this one we can use to center inline level elements by setting it to the value center. And this one is an inherited property, and inherited properties must always be set on the parent. So what I have done inside that code, both of these boxes I have wrapped inside another box. And exactly on that box I have set text align to the center. But this will ultimately cause then not only these boxes to be centered, but also the image and the text inside that I have inside the other box. So that image in here and that X, that one character that I have in here. Because of that inheritance that is going on. And therefore what I have done straight away on both of these boxes with the white background here, I have then remedied this by setting text align to the left. Meaning the image and the X are not in the center, but on the left, where they are by default. So this as short repetition what we have done, because some of those things we will encounter in this week again. And now let's get started with the background. And I've both of these boxes I have given the same class image container. The second box I have given also an additional value, class value of BG, and that is exactly the one that I will be using now right here. And the shortcut is background, which we are skipping for now. Let us, as usual, first go over all the individual properties that are part of the shortcut. And the first one is background color. And here we define ultimately such as a English keyword, such as color red, and then our box will be red. Now the next one, and now we are getting into images. The next value of that shortcut background is background image, and that is then the image that we want in the background. Of course, now we first need to specify which image we want. So we are defining here a path to the server where that image is located. And there is one functionality inside the browser that can make us that job, that can provide us that functionality, and that is the URL function. A function we have, that URL function we have already seen. It's that function that is always used whenever in CSS we want to fetch something from the server, such as an image, or such as a font family file. This is where we have used it already. And the URL function, I have skipped last week or 2 weeks ago what a function actually is. Let me now give a completely non-technical and loose description of what a function is. And we know that the browser is a software, and software is code. It's written in code. And there is one part of code, one block of code that's providing that functionality, that functionality. Another block of code is providing that functionality. And those blocks of codes that provide, each of them providing a certain functionality, we can call them because some of them have names. So we are calling them, hey URL function, hey block of code, who can provide that functionality, that service of fetching us something from the server. And here, these brackets we always use to indicate, hey, we are calling now a function, and also to use these brackets here inside to specify what that function, what that block of code needs in order to bring us, to do what it can do, to provide that functionality. So in here we are specifying the path, so that this function, this block of code, knows where to get that file that we want from the server. And that path is just text, nothing else. And whenever we are only specifying text in here, then we need to wrap it inside quotation marks. And the path that I'm now specifying is, I'm right now inside the style CSS. So I'm going out one folder, then into the images folder, and the image that I want to include now is the Disney.jpg file, the image. So I'm going out one folder, period, dividing things up by /, going into the images folder, and then I can specify the image inside that folder, which one I want that functionality, that block of code, which image I want it to fetch, which file I want it to fetch. And once I reload now the page, here is now the image. By default, background images as well as content images, if we don't specify anything, then they will have their original size. So this one is quite a tiny image that I am having here, and it's the original size. That one is applied now. This is how the dimensions of the original image size here. Same here in the background. The difference here is, as we saw most likely already, it repeats all over again, horizontally whenever there is enough space still. It repeats also vertically. And that is exactly the next property in that shortcut. It's background repeat, and here we define ultimately whether things shall be repeated or not, or how things shall be repeated. By default, the value used here is repeat, and we can also define, hey, only repeat it horizontally on the x-axis, or only repeat it vertically on the y-axis. So once I set it to y, then only vertical repeat will be applied, and most likely the value that we want to use most often is no repeat. Hey, don't repeat the image neither horizontally nor vertically. And here we have our original size of the image only once, same as with our content image that is right in here. Now the next value, and when to use repeat, we will have an example in a couple of moments. Let's go for the next value in the shortcut, and that is background position. So here, of course, we can ultimately define how that image shall be positioned horizontally and vertically. And that only works when we have leeway, when that image has space to move around, either horizontally or vertically. Or it also works when the image is overflowing. Then we can also position it. But once the image takes up the exact width and the exact height, then there is neither a leeway nor is there overflow, so to position the image around. So right now it works. There is leeway in this case. We can position it either on the x or on the y-axis, and that one actually exists in their individual properties already, position x and y. However, Firefox does not support those individual ones, which is okay. Firefox is a major browser that we want to support, but that one doesn't, so we never make use of x and y individually. We just make use of background position, and in here we can define x and y simultaneously at the same time. That is also the reason why Firefox does not support the individual ones, because that one is sufficient all the way. So here x, for example, we can use the English keywords. We can use left, which the image is positioned right now. We can use center and right. And in terms of vertical, we can use top, center and bottom in terms of the English keywords that we can use. So let me now put it straight away to the opposite side, right, bottom, and now the image will be exactly at the opposite location, at right horizontally and at bottom vertically. We are of course not limited, however, with English keywords. We can also make use of pixels and also of percentages. And we can also combine keywords with pixels and percentages. For example, right 5 pixels, meaning position it on the right, but then 5 pixels away. And we can also define negative values, as for example, minus 20 pixel, be on the right, but then 20 pixel out. And this is now where the image is overflowing. And this is now something to consider here for our next property that we will be discussing, the last property in our shortcut. It's a key feature here to understand that the background images, when they overflow, they are never visible. Even though if we, for example, set now overflow to visible, doesn't work. Completely doesn't work. Background images are never visible outside their element in which that background image is applied upon. In comparison to content images, as soon as this image goes over, it will immediately be visible. By default, it is visible. And then we can set it, for example, to hidden or attach a scroll bar, so we have a couple of options here. But background images, and that is important, they are never visible when they overflow their element on which they are applied upon. So this is for later. For the next value important, let me now go over position once again. So besides that pixels and keywords which we can combine all together, we can also only specify one value, meaning only the horizontal value, and then the vertical value will by default be center. That is always the default value that is ultimately then used if we don't specify anything for vertical. So let's go over the last one where this feature of overflow becomes relevant, and that is background attachment. And the default value that is used here is scroll. And in order to see that effect, we first of all need further content in this box. Content that overflows, and then we are attaching a scroll bar here by setting overflow to auto. So therefore what I have created here already, I have created another container box, and that box I have given quite a height. And that one is right now overflowing all the way. By default, content, as we know, content is always visible when it overflows. So what we can do, we can set overflow to auto in this case. And auto means attach a scroll bar, but only attach that scroll bar when there is in fact overflowing content and not before. And here we have our scroll bar now. Now we can access the entire content by using the scroll bar, and now we see the effect of background attachment scroll. Because now that image will always scroll along. It will always be visible wherever we go with the scroll bar. The further we down, it's always at that position. Meaning it is attached to the element itself. And it can be accessed. It's always visible when we scroll. That's why the value scroll. And also it is not in the center right now. Even though if I set it to center the background position, it is in the center, but kind of it doesn't include the scroll bar. So it's in the center. From here it's true. There's equal space here from the right than there is on the left. But it's not really looking good because it's not in the center when we consider the scroll bar here. It should be further to the left. And now comes another value that we can use for background attachment. And that is local. And now that image seems to be gone. That image is now attached also to the element, but it's in relation also, it's in the center. It's not scrolling along, it's in the center here. In the center of the height of this box. And also it's now in the center considering also the scroll bar. So it's further to the left here now. It's in the center right here with that gap here and that gap here, even though there would actually be more gap right here. So that is what local does. And now comes the last value, and the difference to that value is that it is not attached relative to the element in which that background image is applied upon. Instead, it is attached to the viewport. And the viewport we haven't discussed yet. The viewport is always the visible area in which the current website is being displayed. Right this area, including the scroll bar. But isn't that the body already? The body element is that element that's the ultimate container box for our content. It starts also from top here, but it goes all the way down and ends right here after the footer. And that footer here, it ends right here. Meaning right now the viewport, however, in comparison to the body, is only that rectangle here, including the scroll bar. The body doesn't include the scroll bar. The viewport does. So it's only that area right now at the given point without scrolling the page that is now right now being visible, being there. So that's the difference. That's the viewport. And this is exactly where that image is now attached towards the viewport. Meaning if I now change the background position to left, for example, left top, the original value, then it will be gone. It will actually now, let me mark it for a second, it will be located right here. But overflow is never visible, so we will not see it. Overflow of a background image is never visible. Nevertheless, it's right here. It's relative to the viewport. And when to use something like this, we have an example coming up in a couple of moments, but that is what the fixed value does. And it's, however, let me once again change it to center. It also scrolls along, so it has that same effect as background attachment fixed. The only different thing is that it's not attached to the element, relative to the element, but to the viewport. But it also scrolls along. That is also its feature, same as scroll, the scroll feature has. So this is background attachment, the last value in our property background. And now let's fill our shortcut here with the actual values that we have now specified individually. And so the first one is color, then comes the background image that we want to have, whether we want that image to be repeated, how that image shall be positioned in the background, and then ultimately where that image relative to where shall that image be attached. And these are the values, all the individual ones part of the shortcut. And that one will not change anything, of course. The only difference is we are using 1 line of code instead of using 5 lines of code in this case. Now, the position and the attachment and the repeat as well, we can actually move around as we want, because the keywords are always unique for their property. So if there was, for example, let's imagine there was a property that was making use of pixels, 20 pixels, and another one that was making use, another property value also making use of pixels. Then we could not move that one before that one, because that would confuse the browser. Then it would apply 30 pixel to the one before. But in here, all these properties are ultimately have their individual keywords. None of them is duplicating anything, so we can move things around. It's just me, I always use first position and then I use the attachment. So that's a preference thing in this case. So these are all the individual ones that are part of the shortcut. And now let's go into another one that is not part of the shortcut, and that is, one of them is background size. And with that one we are determining how much space our background image, how much of the area on which the background image is applied, how much shall it fill of that area. So one option that we have here is we can set things to cover. And before we make use of that one, actually, let me remove the overflow once again now. So we are back to original. So right here, and also let me remove the auto value right here. So background size cover. And it will now cover, therefore, as the name implies, cover the entire area of this box. And before I go to the result, I want to now also cover that image, that content image. I want that one to take up all the width until here and all the height of that box until here. And I do this by setting the image, which is here a child of that box, to 100% width and 100% height, which will make that cover possible, that completely covering the entire area. So I have created this already, 100% width and height. I have now given to the content image, and to the background image I have given cover the entire area. And now we will see the difference, what actually happens. Now first of all, I have still fixed here in place. Let me remove that one, and here we go. So that is the actual result that I intended. So here is now our image that is now completely distorted. It has a broken ratio, while this one doesn't. And this is the difference to what background size cover does. It still covers the entire area, but whenever there is more width than height, then it overflows in order to keep the ratio, which we always want. We never want to break the ratio of an image. That doesn't look good. This image is now completely distorted. So it does this by letting things overflow. We can see here only until here the tree is visible. So all the remaining part is overflowing on the left. And also on the right, this tree here is not visible. It's overflowing here on the right, in order to cover the entire area, but still keep the ratio. And it overflows on the left and on the right equally. It's again depending upon how we position it. So if I go for left, then it will completely be visible, the image on the left, but everything else on the right, there will be twice as much overflow now on the right side. So it's also dependent, of course, up on the position then ultimately. We can position something when it overflows or when there is leeway inside that element on which the image is applied, when there is leeway for that image to move around, or when it overflows. So this is what background size cover does. In comparison to distorting the image, it still keeps the ratio. Another option that we have is contain. And contain, same as the word implies, it contains that background image inside the element on which the background image is applied upon, and it will never overflow. But it will also never lose the ratio. and it does so by just going as wide as it can or as high as it can, and then it will stop. So it still has no broken ratio, but it will never overflow. That is another value that we can use. An example for this one would, for example, if we have images that are taken in vertical, with vertical, such as a skyscraper, for example. If I now made all these images to cover the entire area, then from this skyscraper, if we position things to the bottom, then only the little bit on top of that skyscraper would be visible. But by using contain, the actual entire image is visible. So that is one example when to use contain. And of course it completely depends, same as with cover, whether the image in contain takes up the entire width, whether it reaches the width first or the height, or in terms of cover, whether it overflows horizontally or vertically. This depends, of course, on the image size and on the size of the box on which the image is applied upon. So if I reduce now the height of this box, then now it will take up the entire height, and once it has reached one end, it will stop. And it will not go any further, neither in its height nor in its width. It will never overflow, never will it ever break the ratio of the image, which we never want. That is not a good thing to have. So these are the values that we can use. Another value that is used by default is auto, meaning take the original size of the image. That is the auto value, which was there if we don't specify anything else. Before we now go into further properties here, let us discuss multiple images. So we can set multiple images by just, let me copy and paste this, and also using it here in the same line by dividing things up by comma. Now the first image in this case will be the one that is in the foreground, and the second one will be in the background. Now the background color only exists once, of course, and that background color is always in the most background. Therefore it can only be defined, the background color, on the image that is in the last background. Therefore the first image cannot have a background color, otherwise we will not have an effect, we will not be able to include multiple images. And the image that I now want to include is the dotted bg.png image. And that one consists just of one single dot, nothing else. A dot that we cannot really see because it is so tiny. And that dot I now want to let repeat all over again, horizontally and vertically. So to give you an example when to use repeat. And what I want that first image to be, I want it to have its original size, this just one single tiny dot. And the second image now I want to be covered. So as well here, also for these properties that are not part of the shortcut, we are dividing things up by comma. The first value is then referring to the most top image, and the second in this case, because I only have two, is referring to the one that is in the further background. And this is now the result. So the image now, here we can see the dot, it's repeated all over again, horizontally as vertically. And one example, maybe we have seen something like this on the web already, it's quite common, such an effect. So when we go over images, then these dots appear ultimately. So when we go over, we haven't yet discussed how that is actually possible, that something changes when we go over. All we assume for now is it's JavaScript, but it's actually even possible with CSS, changing content and appearance when something happens, such as a mouse going over. We can already in fact do with CSS, we are not just limited to JavaScript. Let me now give another image. Straight away a third image I want to include here, and that one I want in front of behind the dotted background, the dots, but I want that one to be before the Disney castle. And the one that I will be including now is the Disney logo.png. And that one I do not want to be repeated, so I'm going for no repeat. And I do not want to have that one centered, so here it doesn't matter actually. And here I will go for left top, which is the default, so I don't need to specify it, left top. And here no repeat. And therefore here I also need to change things, because that logo of the Disney, I now want it to be in its original size, I do not want it to be covered. So the first image is original size, second one as well, and cover is the third, the castle. Covers the entire area. So this is the result. Now we have 3 different kinds of background images here, and we are not limited in the amount of background images that we want to use. Completely open, completely unlimited of whatever we prefer. Now let's go into the next property that is not part of the shortcut, and that background origin. And with that one, we define ultimately where the images shall start. And that one only has an effect when we have padding or a border. Because here we can start whether the images, the background images, shall start in the border area or in the padding area. So therefore, I have included this X here. So I've now set the padding to 20 pixel, and here we can see that X. So 20 pixel gap inside the box on every side now, and also border. 20 pixel border, and that border I have given transparency, opacity, which we will go over towards the end of this week. And here, so that we can still see the image in the background. Now by default we can see that the Disney castle, the Disney logo is starting in the padding area. And don't we know those words here already that we will now be using? This is the content box, defined by width and height. This is the padding box, defined by padding. Border box is the next one, and then margin box, which is the gap outside the box. All of these boxes ultimately determine how much space an element takes up on our website, better known under the category of box model. And exactly those values we will now be using, the values that we have already used with box sizing, whether padding and border shall be included inside our dimension calculations or not. So the values that we can use here for background origin are border box, padding box, and content box. Margin box doesn't work. So by default, Disney starts here, and so do the other images. The only thing why it appears that the other ones are starting somewhere else is because of overflow. But the image is actually starting here as well, the castle image, and the dots as well. It's just that overflow. So let us therefore rather focus on the Disney castle in order to not get confused, the Disney logo in order to not get confused. So this is padding area, where everything is originating, starting right now, and now I'm changing it to border area, to border box. Border box, which is the border area. And right here. So now everything starts in the border, not in the padding area. Also the castle, but it is overflowing. That's why it seems to be not really true here, but it's actually also the fact. Now let me go for content area, and we can see it in height. There's nothing overflowing. Now the castle image is starting right here because there is a 20 pixel padding right here. So here it's starting. So is the Disney logo starting inside the content area. Now let me go back to border box. Most likely this one looked quite best from all the options. And now comes the next property, and that one is background clip. And background clip is directly related to background origin. Because here we are defining where it shall be clipped. So cut off, we are cutting off the image. And once again we have the values border box, padding box, and content box. So once I, for example, define now content box, it will be clipped. It will still originate the image. It will still start right here, but it will be clipped now right here. So that is what clip does. So it's directly dependent upon origin, of course. And whether we have a padding and border depends whether we can make use of origin in the first place. So this is background clip. And now let me actually get that back to border box, to the nicer look that can be made out of this example here. So these are the properties. There's one more that we will be discussing in a moment. For now, let us do a little bit of repetition by setting now another background image. A background image that shall be applied on the entire website, going from all the way. And I have therefore already created another box on purpose. Therefore we have more, we are scrolling, we have more content here. And so where do we do this setting on if we want a background image on the entire area, on the entire body, of course, all the way from all the way top to all the way down, the body element we are now targeting. Let me therefore scroll up, and that one is already using a background shortcut. So I've removed that one. And instead of going for the shortcut now, let me go over the individual properties in order, I think it's clearer to what I am doing here then. So let me go background image, and let me use, of course, the URL function again, this block of code inside the browser that can do a functionality for us. And it can do that functionality. It can fetch us a file when we give him the path. A path is just text, so we need to wrap that path inside quotation marks. And the path is we need to go out the CSS folder inside the images folder, and then we can include the image. The one that I will be including is disney.bg, Disney background.jpg. And now let's take a look how this is now appearing on our website. So right now, that image, which is quite a large one, this is how it actually looks like. This image is now has its original size because we didn't specify anything. So meaning it occupies its original size, and then if there is still available space, it will repeat. So here it repeats right now only vertically, because horizontally there is no available space. So in order to fit now the entire body area. But this is of course not looking good. So how do we get it now better? First of all, let us remove the repeat. That's the first thing that we will now be doing. Background repeat, and let's set it to no repeat. But that of course means now when it's not repeating that there is white space now, that there is a white and white area instead of being an image. So let us now say, hey, cover the entire area by using background size cover. Background size cover, meaning we are telling him now to cover the entire area in terms of width and height, meaning the image will only go until here and will overflow right now. But in order for it to cover the entire area, it needs to stretch the image, which will then make us see the pixels quite close, quite clearly. Of course, that one is not a good option. And imagine we even had more content, then the pixels would even be further stretched. So it doesn't look good at all. So what is the solution here? And it is background attachment. Background attachment using the value fixed. So making the background fixed relative to the viewport. Meaning instead of now going all the way down and having to stretch all the way, all we are doing now is that image only needs to take up this one viewport area, including the scroll bar. This area it will take up. Nothing else that comes further down, only this one rectangle. And this is perfect. And fixed, that has this feature of whenever we then scroll, it will always be there. So perfect. This is the solution ultimately that we are looking for. So let's go for background attachment and set the value to fixed. And here we go. Perfect. Now it doesn't need to be stretched. It will only take up the viewport area width and height, and it will always be there as when we scroll along. Perfect. This is now the ultimate solution altogether. Now what I will be doing now, I will be making an intro container. That image of course has a castle and here's some text. Would be nice if that image would actually be exactly immediately visible once we load the page. And then when we scroll, then we will see ultimately the content of this website. So an intro container I will now be making, which I have already done actually. And that is this one, intro container. I have placed that one right after the body, before the header element. Meaning it's right before, right here, it will be displayed. And now I will give that one a height of, let's say, 1000 pixel. A width I don't need to specify, as we know by default block level elements, which the div is, I have not reset it to inline, display inline block. So it's a block level elements, and block level elements, if we don't specify a width, it will be as wide as the parent, or better said, as the content area of the parent. Because if the body element, it's its parent, that is its parent, if that one had a padding, it could only go until here, for example. But it doesn't have a padding and neither has it a border, so it will go completely until here. And it will only take up without the scroll bar. So content is always, if it's not viewport unit, viewport takes up everything including the scroll bar, everything else, the body, only goes until here. And this is now what we ultimately have. And container box, that is large, 1000 pixel, meaning once we reach 1000 pixel, then our content comes along. So, but that one is coming a little bit late, isn't it? Because those 1000 pixel, I mean, we actually want it to come immediately. As soon as we start scrolling, then the header shall come up. But we never know the height of the viewport. So, because my screen size is now this, but if I go for that screen size, then the viewport height is now different. So we cannot set a fixed height that a pixel unit does in order to let us achieve this. And therefore, let me introduce a new unit, and that is the viewport height unit. And it's same with percentages. 100 is completely the complete height, and 0 is no. So 0 to 100% in this case, but just with another unit, the viewport height. Meaning take up 100% of the viewport height, depending upon how high the viewport is. If it's only that high, take up that height. So that is what you shall do. And now let's take a look. And here we go. Now, right when we start scrolling, then the header comes immediately. And if I now reduce my browser window to fake, for example, a smaller screen, then nevertheless it comes up straight away. It always is 100 viewport height, meaning 100 completely taking up one screen height here, one of those visible content area heights here that the viewport height is about. Now, one more thing with the Walt Disney doesn't really look good. It's cut the text, and the picture, there is pictures, doesn't even show up in this case. So let me set the background position, and the background position, let me set it to bottom, position to bottom. So at least the text will be visible. Maybe the castle will be cut a little bit in this case, but it's still better than the text being cut away. So that text is now always there, and it's always in the center. Perfect. We have set it to the bottom. So this is what we can do with background attachment. Now, this image has a ratio of 16:9. So meaning width-height ratio. 16 times width, 9 times height. If it was 16:8, then it would be twice as wide than it was high. 16:9 ratio is a little bit less than twice as wide as high. So, and 16:9 is the ratio that is used nowadays by screen manufacturers. When they build screens, they build it in that size. Maybe if we do not consider iPad, because that is a little bit different. But that one we will be discussing in the week when we go over how to make our website compatible, responsive with all the screen sizes, mobile phones, large TV screens, etc. But for now, 16:9, because it's a standard used by the screen manufacturers. And the browser window is usually open on the entire screen. So therefore, if we are using images or also videos that we have taken ourselves, then we should take them in a ratio of 16:9, which all photo-taking devices, modern ones, allow us to do. So 16:9 is the ratio that we should go for. Now, 16:9 is, of course, that is right now what I have my browser window open, but that includes, of course, all the stuff that I have here, the tabs that are open right here, the URL bar, and all the developer toolbar that I have here. But if that one wasn't there, for example, a person that doesn't develop websites most likely doesn't have a web developer toolbar. Or here in Explorer, for example, is the URL bar straight next to the tabs that are here. So here it's much better. Here we can see 16:9 is pretty much almost perfect. And the castle would actually go until here, having an equal space towards the top of the castle as it is towards the top of the bottom, underneath the text here pictures. So 16:9 is the recommended way to take images and videos that are used for the web, but we will go into further detail on that topic once we get into that week where we will discuss mobile phones and large other screen sizes. Now comes the last one and the last property that we haven't yet discussed, and that is background blend mode, which I already have here. Background blend mode, right now it's normal. And what background blend mode does, we can manipulate the colors on our image based on the colors that are in the background, either on a background image or on a background color that we have set. Meaning right now there is only one background image, therefore this one doesn't work. Whichever value that we set here, there are quite a number of values, it will have no effect. So let me go for multiply, in this case multiply, and that one will not change anything right now because there is only one image, and therefore it cannot mix the colors, it cannot multiply the colors in this case. So what we need first here in order for that to see the effect here is first we need to set, for example, either another image or a color now. Background color, let me give it red, and now we can actually see the effect. So the colors that are on top of each other at the given pixel, at each given pixel, are now multiplied, ultimately resulting in that image. And there are quite a number of ways in which we can manipulate the colors or make them be combined, and many options that exist here. So these options are the ones that we most likely use in a photo editor software when we are editing our photos. And this is what we can also use here. All these values we are not going over right now. But background blend mode is a new property, and a relatively new property, and the support for it is quite okay nevertheless, but it has some cross-browser issues. Therefore, here we can see it's written in blue, same as background attachments. So we now need to go a little bit into cross-browser issues here, and we start with background attachment. It's nothing bad, nothing too bad at least. It's because the mobile browsers, some of them do not support it. For example, Opera Mini doesn't support it, Android browser doesn't support it, and Chrome does only support the value local, but not the value fixed. While all the other browsers, the major desktop browsers, it's all fine, and iOS, Safari is also fine. So it's not the worst thing, because most likely when we are using the attachment, we want things to be attached in the background when we actually have a background. But for mobile phones, the screens are so small, we most likely, or that depends on the situation of course, but it's less likely that we will be making use of a background in the first place. So it depends on the situation, but it's not the worst scenario that mobile browsers are not supporting it. There are worse scenarios that we will encounter also in this week, at least in one situation. Now let's go over the viewport units. The units are right here, and viewport width and viewport height are not supported by Opera Mini. So that is one shortcoming here as well. So if we have people visiting our website that use the Opera Mini browser on their mobile phone, then they will not see the effect if we have set something to that unit. And that one is not too bad either, but something to consider nevertheless. And now comes background attachment, background blend mode, the relatively new one by which we can manipulate the image based on the colors that are on top of each other, and that one is this one. So here Microsoft doesn't support it, none of those browsers. Then Safari does not support the last values here. These 4 values are not supported by Safari, while the other ones are. And also Opera Mini doesn't support it, and Android browser is now supporting it, and most likely when we are really developing websites, then this one here will be fine, most likely, if they continue to support it. Sometimes it happens that they stop, as we have seen it with background attachment. Is that background? Let me go back to attachment, for example. Here we go. Such as Android browser used to support it, but then stopped. So this is as people do not make too much use of attachment when for mobile, only for desktop browsers. So that's the reason for it. But that is should be pretty fine. And the blend thing is it's a little bit vague still. It's not too bad, but something that we need to consider if we want to make use of it. So this is now background. We are done now with all the background properties, and we are now going into content images. Content images, the ones that we create by using the image element. And I have, as we have seen, already created this one same image that is right here. Let me remove the intro container in this case, because then I don't need to scroll down the entire time. So here is our image right now it is distorted. It has a broken ratio because it's taking up the entire width and height of that box here, but it doesn't overflow and therefore it cannot keep the ratio. However, we can also make that image to keep the ratio, also content images, in pretty much in a similar way as we have done it with background images. Let me just find where am I? I'm right here. So right now they have a width and a height of 100%. Let me first of all reset that to its original. So by default, the image has its original size, like it is without us specifying anything. It has original size. And now let's make use of object fit. And object fit here has the value cover, for example, as well, and it has the exact same effect. Now then it can let things overflow in order to keep the ratio. It will never break the ratio, but it can overflow if it has to. In this case, if it's not a square image, because that one is inside a square, then it would of course take up the entire area. And here we see nothing happens. And this is because we first of all need to stretch the image over the entire area where we want that one to be covered, and then it will work, and before not. So first we need to stretch it, which has a broken ratio, and then we can make use of it, cover, and then it will overflow. Same thing on the left equally as on the right, because the position that is used here is center by default, one that we will take a look at in a moment. Then contain the exact same value. It will be contained inside, it will never ever overflow, and it will never break the ratio. It will only either go as wide or as high. Once it reaches one side, the end of one side, it will stop in the width and in the height. So that is contain as well. And now comes fill. That is taking up 100% of the entire area, width and height, never overflow, but break the ratio if you have to, which is happening right now. So if we don't specify anything, then fill, that is the value that is being used. Now, if we want to go back to the original size of the image actually, we can do so by using none here. And now by default it will be centered right in the middle, horizontally and vertically. And that is what the next property is in charge of. Background object position, and it's the same as background position. So at least in the effect, here we can determine the vertical, the horizontal and the vertical one, so the x-axis and the y-axis. So let me move it, for example, once again to left top, which is the default value used on background, and here we go. And we can move it around in the same way by using pixels in addition to keywords or pixels itself. So we are completely free how we want that image to ultimately be positioned inside the parent element in which it is. So this is the parent here, of course, because the image is part of the content. Now let me scroll down. The image is right here. That is its parent now. For background image, that one doesn't have a parent. It's in the background. But the image, that is its parent. So it's always relative to its parent how ultimately things are done here. So let me now go for the last one, and that is filter. And those ones are actually how I have already created. And once again, it's manipulating the images, the colors, etc., everything that's involved in there. And for example, the blur. So we are not manipulating now images that are on top of each other based on colors that meet each other. One is in the back, one is on the top, as we would have with background blend mode. Instead, this is only affecting one single image, nothing else. For example, we can blur it by using a length value. And length value always means pixels. So pixel, 5 pixel, for example. And here this image is now blurred. And besides using blur, we can also, for example, use grayscale. 0 meaning it's no gray, 100% meaning it's fully grayscale. And here we go, now it's grayscale. And we can also make use of multiple values by dividing them up by comma. And yeah, it's completely what we would do in a photo editor, same thing. So here we can of course do things dynamically then ultimately. If we used, for example, a photo editor to do this, and if this filter property wouldn't exist, then we need to do with the photo editor, we need to do that image in grayscale, we need to load it to the server and the original one. So for example, if we blurred this image, make it blur like we did before, then only users that have registered, for example, can view that image in a non-blurred version. All other users that have not registered, they cannot view the images. So as an example. So this is completely into designing here, and I will also not go over the other properties or over the other values that exist, but this is how we can manipulate images. Only one single image in comparison to background blend mode that depends upon multiple images or multiple colors on top of each other. And that filter property is quite a new one as well. It's also in its CSS level 1. We have discussed last week that CSS 3 doesn't really exist. It's just used this expression to mean the latest version of CSS. But things have been broken down into so-called modules, and that filter property here is still on level 1, so in CSS 1 level, while object fit, for example, is on CSS level 3. That is on 3, and some of them are even in level 4. So completely depends. And filter, therefore, we may have guessed it or we may have seen it already in CSS. All of them actually have cross-browser issues. And that one is actually a pity, the object fit, as we will see in a moment. Let me first of all discuss why are these properties right here under styling. Even though actually filter is the only one that has to do with styling. That one is positioning, would be under here. And object fit, who has to do with dimension, would be under here. So I wanted to keep them together and not break them apart. But the category styling only actually applies to filter. So now let's take a look at cross-browser, the cross-browser issues that we are facing here. So first of all, the filter one. The filter effects, this is what it is supported right now. Only the Edge browser is supporting it apart from the URL function. So what we can also do here, we can define a SVG file, which we haven't yet discussed. That one is not supported. Then most of these are still using prefixes. Firefox and Microsoft have already removed them. They consider that one to be fixed already. But WebKit, all the WebKit browsers, they still require prefixes. So otherwise it's pretty fine actually what relates to filter. Then now object fit, and that one we will see, that is a little bit of a pity because it's a real handy thing, that object, a real handy property, because Microsoft doesn't support it. Now Safari doesn't support object position, but that is not too bad because object position is by default is center already. If we don't make use of it, and Safari can't make use of it, then it will be in the center by default. And this is most likely at least what we want in the center. So it's not too bad that Safari doesn't support that one. For Opera Mini, it supports it, and here we need to use the O prefix. And that one we haven't yet discussed. The prefix we know is always based on the browser engine that the browsers are using. And the WebKit browser engine is at least a fork, a subversion of that one is used by most of the browsers. Opera Mini, however, in comparison to Opera itself, they use the WebKit browser engine version. Opera Mini instead uses its own one, and therefore we need to prefix here with O for representing Opera. Now that is now the pity here, that object fit is not supported by Microsoft. So one remedy solution that I have been using so far, it completely depends, and I show you a couple of other ones in a moment. One solution would be, and all of them include JavaScript. So I won't go over the syntax, of course, of what this code is. But all it does is it detects, first of all, whether object fit is supported. And if it is not supported, then it is checking all the images that all the images that we want to support, that are making use of object fit. So in my case, it's the element with the ID photo. So write this one here. I've given it the ID photo. So this one, if we make use of that snippet code that I'm using, we need to change, of course, that one here to the element that we want to use. Same as we would do in CSS if we give it a class name with period, otherwise with ID photo. So the elements that we want to replace ultimately with background images. So all the elements that are ultimately not supporting, all the browsers, Microsoft browsers that do not support the background image, the content image object fit property, then we are changing that one to ultimately to background images. So let me remove that and let us investigate this one. So right now, even though object fit is set, it doesn't work. The image is still distorted. The ratio is broken. And now I'm replacing that image with a background image. So instead of using a content image, it's now a background image. And background, here we can make use of cover as well. And that one is supported by Explorer. So this would be one example here when we can make use of how we can remedy the solution. Now, if we really want to make use of filter, this is what we cannot do now anymore, because this is now a background image. And we cannot manipulate this background image. Here we can only use then background blend mode. But filters can only be used on content images. So this is a shortcoming, and we always need to weigh things up what we need ultimately. And now I want to show you a website where we can actually find all the fillings, how we can remedy a cross-browser support that is lacking, or a browser that is lacking cross-browser support, such as Microsoft in this case. And these are so-called polyfills. So we are filling the gap usually with JavaScript. And now let me find object fit, and here we will encounter even 3 solutions. And once we click on those ones, they will tell us what to do, how to include that code ultimately, in order that it then does some kind of support for Microsoft in this case, for example. So here, these are the polyfills. And here we can find many polyfills, also for filter, for pretty much anything that is not supported, almost anything we can find here on that website. It's a list of all of them. Now, lastly, I want to go over a couple of further content image related things. And these are, first of all, a couple of attributes that the image element can have in addition to the ones that we have given so far, the source attribute, and also to what actually happens to an image once it takes up the entire, or once it determines the height of the box in which it is inside. So we know that this box right now I've given a fixed height of 300 pixels. So what happens if I now remove the height of this box? Then it will be as high as its content. And the content is its image in this case. And right here the content is just the X plus padding and border. That's it. So, but let's focus on this one. So it should go, ultimately the height should go until here, right where the image ends in terms of height. And this is actually a topic that I forgot to mention in week number 4. This is where it ultimately actually fits inside that topic. So the height that I have given here, 300 pixel, I am now removing. Meaning by default, the height will be determined by the content. It will be as high, this box now, as the content. Now this image is now in the center. First of all, let me remove object none here and also those ones here. So it has its original size. And here we can see that it's not really completely, there is a little bit more actually than the actual content. It's a little bit of a gap here. And this is not only for images, but for any inline level element. And this is due to the descenders, because the browser thinks all inline elements are treated by the browser as if they were text. And wherever is text, the browser keeps a little bit of space underneath for the so-called descenders, which are, here we can see it with the Q and the Y. They are going further down here, the Q and the Y as well. These are the so-called descenders. And this is exactly the amount of space that it's now also here giving here to the image, to that inline element. So that would also happen if we, for the boxes, those two we have also set inline block next to each other. And they are now also treated as if they were text. But we usually, so there would be a same gap here, right here. Right here, sorry. But it's not the case, because we usually with boxes vertically align them straight away. And that is exactly the solution, how we can remove this bit of space here for the descenders that's kept for the descenders. So once I will now set the image or vertically align the image, vertical line is not an inherited property, so we set it on the image itself or on the element itself. vertically align it to the top, and then that one will be gone. Another option that we have, in case that image will not have anything next to it, then we can also set it to display block. And once something is display block, then the browser doesn't treat it as text anymore. So that is another option. In case we don't want anything next to the image, then this option is also fine. Setting things to display block, then that gap will also be gone. So that is one little thing that I wanted to go over, which actually would have been part number 4, where we discussed all these properties that can be applied to all inline level elements. Now let's go over a couple of attributes here for the image elements. It has the source attribute, of course, where we specify the path to the server where the image is located. Another one is the alternative value. And here we specify what the image is about for screen readers, for example, or for search engine robots. And therefore, also, should there ever be a problem loading the image, at least there is a textual description of what the image is about. So we always would specify Disney Castle in this case. And this one doesn't appear, hasn't any appearance. However, that one will now appear right in Internet Explorer, because that one now has a background image. We have replaced it with a JavaScript code, replaced a background image, the content image with a background image. And here it says Disney Castle. So it shows up when the content image cannot be loaded, which is the case right now. So this is, we can remove remedy this as well with JavaScript, not a problem. But this is what the alternative value is about. And now comes 2 more properties, and then we are done with content images for now. And that is width and height. So now why would we ever specify width and height, or why do width and height actually exist in their attributes, first of all? Because didn't we say that anything that has to do with appearance of the content shall always be in CSS? We shouldn't make use of the global style attribute and define the height in here, for example, because it shall always be done in CSS, the appearance of the content. Then why do images even have their own attributes specifying width and height? And that is only for reasons of speeding up the page load. So we know that the image is taking up the original size by default. And if it doesn't know the CSS dimensions yet of how much space it shall actually use to make the image, then it will use the original size first. And usually the content is quicker read than the CSS code, because the browser reads and encounters a path to the CSS, gets that file, and then starts reading. But even before it fetches that file, even before it comes back that file, the browser already continues reading. Meaning it will always, pretty much always, make the default reserve the space on the website for the original image, and not for the actual image size that we actually want. Now this has nothing to do with ultimately things that get displayed. It's something at a pre-stage before the website gets displayed, because the browser never displays the website before it doesn't have the CSS. So it's something before, but it prevents the browser to reorganize things, and that's giving further speed. It increases the speed by which the browser can work ultimately. So whenever we can, we should specify either width or height, but that is not always possible, and never, or usually never, we would specify both, only width, because it will then infer the height from the ratio. So width 200, for example, would ultimately result in this height then, to keep the ratio. So it's either width or height. We should, when we can, we should specify, and this number is always in pixel. But pixel we cannot attach, it's automatically pixel. So that's the last comment for today on content images. And now lastly, we will take a look at colors. And that is only a brief thing, nothing big. So far what we have used for colors are always the English keyword equivalents, such as red, light gray, but not every color can be accessed with those English keywords. So if we really want to have access to any color that we want to, we are using color codes. And let me do the example now on our header element. The header element is the one that is right now being read. So right here, the red one. And instead of now using an English keyword, one color code is the RGB function. So another block of code inside the browser that's name is RGB, and that one can mix us a color based on R, G, and B, red, green, and blue, by which we can achieve any color based on those three. And here we define how much red, how much green, and how much blue we want based on numbers that range between 0 and 255. So for example, if I go for 0 red, I don't want any red, but I want full green, 255, that's the highest value that we can use, and 0 blue. Ultimately, it will be green, the header box here. So this is the RGB. Always between 0 and 255, the values, and the first value is always red, dividing things up by comma, then comes green, and then comes blue. And of course we can use anything in between 0 and 255. Now the next one is the hex code, the next color code. And that one is not a function, instead it is represented by a hash pound symbol followed by 6 characters. And it's always consisting of 3 pairs, so meaning 3 times 2 characters. And each pair is a color. It's again red, green, and blue. So the first pair also represents red, and these characters range from 0 to 9 and then to F, A to F. 0 being the lowest, F being the highest. Meaning if I go for FF, I mean full red. I want full red. And then maybe no green, no blue will ultimately result in that box being red again. So in here after 9 comes AA. So better said, after 9 comes 9A actually. And then it goes AB, goes all the way to AF, and then it goes to 0 again. Instead the 9 is now changing to A. So this is how things are going up. So 0, 0, let me now remain it with red, however. And here we also have 256 options as well. Same as with RGB, if we consider that the 0 is also an option. So ultimately we have here 256 different options of how much red, how much green, and how much blue we want. And these characters ranging from 0 to F also ultimately give us 256 options for red and for green and for blue. And this number 256 we might still be familiar with. It's quite a very common number to be used in programming in general, because we are communicating, or in technology in general, because we are communicating in bits and bytes, and 8 bits are 1 byte. And bits are always either a 0 or a 1, meaning, for example, in terms of electric current is not there, and a 1 representing electric current is there. And when we communicate something, when we make up a code based on 8 bits, we can ultimately have 256 unique options by which we can make up one thing of 8 bits, of ones and zeros. 256 options, meaning we can communicate 256 different things, such as characters in this case, but also colors as well. 256. So ultimately this is 1 byte, this is 1 byte, this is 1 byte. So each color that we are communicating here is represented in 3 bytes, 24 bits. Now which code should we use? First of all, one more comment to the hex code. If the pair is really the same value here, then we can get rid always of the second value. Now which one should we use? Should we use RGB, hex, or the English keywords? Now we know that with English keywords we are limited, but otherwise in terms of speed or any other things, it's pretty much doesn't matter. There's only one significant thing that the RGB can, and that is we can attach an A to the RGB, an alpha value, which represents transparency, meaning we can add here also a 4th value that will ultimately tell the browser not only what color we want, but also how transparent that color shall be. And that is a value in between 0 and 1. 0 meaning it's gonna be fully transparent. So the red will not be the red will not be visible ultimately. Of course, I need to remove that one. And before it was green. So here it's completely gone now. And now, or actually this one was green. So let me go back to green. Now if I use 1, meaning it's the opposite, nothing will change. It will not be transparent at all. And we can go for any value in between now by using 0 point something, such as 5. Now it will be semi-transparent, meaning the background image is still shining through a little bit. And once we make use of 0 point something, we actually don't need the O. That one is fine as well. So this is transparency. We can at the same time, with the color in the background, we can define the opacity in the background. Done at the same time in the background. Now this is the advantage of RGB, of using that color code. Now opacity can also be defined separately. It has its own property, which is opacity, and here we are using a value in between 0 and 1, same as here. But there will be a little bit of a difference. Let's investigate this. Now here the opacity got only applied to the box on which we did the setting on. Now if I go for the opacity property and provide now also 0.5, the value, now everything will be 0.5, the value. So everything is now semi-transparent, the entire area right here. Not only and I have removed the color here, of course. So let me remove the transparency here. So in comparison here, now everything is opaque here. Also the children, grandchildren, and this is not inheritance. Because once we now reset it, for example, on this container box, the other one inside, the one that we have set the opacity on, if we go for opacity and set here no opacity, it will not work. Because it's not inheritance that is going on here. It is actually opacity is treating the entire element as 1. So therefore, if we really only want that box to have opacity, we need to set the opacity in RGB by using the alpha value here. Because that one is in the background. It doesn't affect any other content, doesn't affect anything else here. While opacity does. And once we set opacity to 0, then everything will be gone, of course. And there is also another one that is visibility, and that one can be set to hidden as well. So what is the difference between opacity 0 and visibility hidden? If I reload the page, nothing, all the children, everything will be gone, while visibility is inherited. So here we can reset it to visibility visible on the children. Now the children at least will be visible, while this is inherited, opacity is not. Opacity treats the entire thing as 1. It can never be reset. So that's the difference. Visibility by default is visible. That's the default value that is used here. All our elements are by default visible. And there is one more value that we will be discussing once we get into tables. The advantage of using visibility over opacity, or there are two things that we may are interested right now, but we come across those again. So when we make an element to be hidden, then nevertheless we can still make JavaScript events up on it. So when that element nevertheless, when it's not visible, still when this area, for example, gets clicked, we can still act upon. That's what we cannot do with opacity. So there are a couple of different, the other way around. This is what we can do with opacity in comparison to visibility. So we can still provide events upon it. And we can access it with the tab key ultimately. When we jump around our website with the tab key, what site disabled people are doing the entire time. So a couple of differences here. But this is it for now. A little bit on colors and opacity towards the end now. We are not yet done with background and content images. Next week we will continue with those and also go over a couple of other things relating to images. While next week is, let me load it here, we will take a look at sprites. So when we are making use of our icons on our website, such as what we have on the website is the English flag was here, the Russian flag, and that always means that we need to go to the server over and over again quite a number of times. So instead what we could do, we can put all our icons inside one image, a so-called sprite. And then we can get individual parts of the image by using the background image. So content image can then not be used anymore. Things need to be done with the background, because in the background we can define, hey, only show 25 pixel, for example, in width and height of the background. For example, only this. And then we can also define where to show those 25 pixel width and height. For example, only on that area on the image. So this is how we can make use of icons, ultimately allowing us that there is only one single server request. Only once all these icons have to be retrieved once from the server, instead of each of them being retrieved from the server individually. So that is next week. Also next week are gradients. So again, we will be using the background property. We can also set gradients, meaning we can let the browser make us an image based on the colors we specify, and those colors will then merge into each other. These are gradients. What we will also take a look at are border images next week, and also image maps. We can make an image, a content image, and then divide that image up into different areas, and each area can be clicked with like a link, and then we are jumping somewhere else. So it's still all about images next week, and also we are taking a look into drawing, and also take a look at the different formats here, JPEG, PNG, and 2 other ones that we are interested in. So that is next week.